Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. Suravangsha Jayate. Om Hri Om. Namaste, everyone. It is absolutely my pleasure, my honor, my privilege to be here with you this evening. And what we are going to be doing is our usual satsangha live stream, aired all over the world. It's wonderful that we have such an enormous family of ISDS devotees situated literally throughout the world. Every single nation of Europe, North America, South America, much of Asia, Australia, etc., etc., etc. Indeed, we have devotees of the ISDS in South Africa, Japan, everywhere throughout the entire world. So it is my honor to be here with you this evening. What we're going to be doing today is we are going to be looking at the path of liberation. That small a topic. Very, very important topic. And why is this the case? Well, before we even jump into the actual talk for today, let me talk about this for just a short time. When it comes to even this one word, liberation, like so many important concepts, has hundreds and hundreds of different definitions, most of them wrong. There are many, many different opinions as far as what is meant by liberation, but then also liberation is spoken of on many different platforms in many different ways, to the point where, throughout the 20th century, the term liberation became a Marxist, atheist political term, to the point where you had so-called liberation movements all throughout, especially the third world. A lot of people don't remember this, but you had such and such liberation army, such and such liberation movement, etc., etc. The point being that indeed the very concept, the very term liberation itself became degenerated to the point where it simply became a political cause. Well, what is actually meant by liberation in the true and the most meaningful and the most important sense of this term is, and I'll state it this way, full existential freedom of the individual person. This is the definition, the true definition of liberation. It's not merely my rights. It's not merely politics this, politics that. No, it's full existential liberation of the person in such a way that regardless of where we find ourselves, we are free. We are free. Now, of course, this being said, what really is meant by this definition? Spiritual liberation. So again, of all the various sorts of liberation that can exist, the very foundation of true freedom, of true liberation, is spiritual liberation. But more, let's go a little bit deeply. In addition to what I've just said, as far as why spiritual liberation is the foundation of all understanding of liberation, on top of this, why is it that it's very important to understand liberation in this sense? Well, we ultimately are indeed spiritual beings. This being the case, when we have spiritual liberation, every other form of liberation is touched upon. So when we have spiritual liberation, we have intellectual liberation. We have liberation, again, in every single sense of this term. So again, this is why this form of liberation is the very foundation of all forms of liberation. So this is what we're going to be talking about today, is very specifically spiritual liberation. And we're going to be doing this by looking at 3 verses from the Bhagavad Gita. And all three of these verses are from the 5th chapter. And the translation that I'll be using today is by Abhaya Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada. And it is his actual translation, not the recent ISKCON translation, which is not his, but rather it's the 1972 Macmillan edition. So thus his original translation of Bhagavad Gita as it is. So with that, we will go through these three verses, three very beautiful verses. And again, just to reiterate to anyone who may be a little bit new here, these words are not just the words of anyone. These are not the words of the latest New Age life coach who has a big channel on YouTube. This is not. These are not the words of just anyone. These are the words of Bhagavan Sri Krishna, of God Himself. So it's very important to keep this in mind whenever we are reading Bhagavad Gita. So with that, let's proceed. The first verse that we're going to look at is Bhagavad Gita and chapter 5, and then this is verse 17. And Krishna proceeds in this way. When one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge, and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. So very, very nice as a preface, where Krishna here explains what are the important prerequisites for an individual to even be on the path of liberation, which again is the spiritual path. So as we always do, let's go through these verses, and let's go through this one very specifically. When one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme. Let's look at this first clause first. So first of all, one's intelligence. What is meant by this? Now you'll notice that Krishna explains here, he says one's intelligence and then mind. In Sanatana Dharma, in yoga psychology, it is understood that these are two separate things. You know, it's very unfortunate. I've studied philosophy, both quote-unquote Eastern, I can't stand that term, but that's all right for the majority of individuals in the audience. I'll use this term. But I've studied philosophy both Eastern and Western. And one thing that I've seen about Western philosophy very specifically, and anyone who's seriously studied philosophy, everyone from Socrates to Descartes to what to speak of modern atheistic philosophers who are of no consequence. When you study most of the philosophers of the West, very sadly, there tends to be a confusion about what is this stuff in here. In fact, I'll state it that way very, very specifically and very much on purpose. What is this stuff in here? And they confuse everything. Soul is mind, mind is intellect, etc., etc. And again, if you don't know this, then you haven't studied any of the important Western philosophers. Indeed, we know that Descartes, for example, thought that intelligence, that thinking itself was the soul, was the self. And again, many of the Western philosophers thought that this was the case. Well, in actuality, in Sanatana Dharma, there is a distinction that is made between all of the various components of what is called chitta, or mind substance, where this is understood in a very sophisticated way, and they're not all confused. My soul is my mind thinking. No, that's nonsense. That's nonsensical. God help us if our soul was our mind. Because how many people have minds that are radically out of control, that are radically troubled, etc., etc.? Well, then, of course, this would mean that our soul was likewise radically out of control, radically filled with problems, etc. No, rather it's understood that there is a distinction between intelligence and mind. Mind being the storehouse of data, of information that is part of the chitta or mind substance. Intellect being that active principle which then takes that data and then uses that data to analyze, etc. So there's a difference between the two. So Krishna begins with when one's intelligence, so in other words, that analyzing, that logical feature of the mind substance, but then mind. So again, even that storehouse that is there. But then we go on, faith. Faith is something which, again and again, I have had to say, Because again, sadly, even individuals who study Sanatana Dharma, um, claim to study Sanatana Dharma, very few people sadly understand what all of the most important elements of Sanatana Dharma are. And faith is one of them. Faith is not just a Christian quote unquote thing. It's not just a Western thing. No, we have faith in Sanatana Dharma. The only difference being that, as I've said many times, it is a more sophisticated understanding of the meaning of faith. Not blind faith, but rather having assurance in X thing because you have had experience that X thing is worthy of such assurance. This is what is meant by faith. And now let's go on. And refuge. Refuge. This I'm going to focus on a little bit longer, because the concept of refuge is a concept that is of extreme importance. We find ourselves as living beings in a world in which everything here is crazy. If you're not aware of that, then you've lived a very privileged life. Things in this world are crazy. All sorts of things are thrown upon us as if often we are in the midst of a storm. And we have suffering, we have happiness, we have all the dualities of this world, etc., etc. And this being the case, everyone is, whether they know it or not, seeking refuge in one way or another. All beings are seeking refuge. And this being the case, of course, this begs the question, in what are we to take refuge? Well, the answer is given here. When one's, all these things, but then refuge, are all fixed in the Supreme. So in other words, when we take refuge, when we surrender our lives unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, of God Himself. So this is what is being said here. When one does all this, when one takes all of these elements of who we are, and then we fix them in the Supreme. Now, what is meant by fixing in the Supreme? This is also something that is of great importance. What is meant by fixing in the Supreme is indeed making God the very center of our life, making God the very center of our reality, of our existence. So when we do this, now we have the result. Then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings. One becomes fully cleansed of misgivings. By misgivings, what is meant is a misunderstanding of reality. We have a misunderstanding of what is real, what is not real. And this being the case, having this misunderstanding, we have misgivings about everything around us. We have confusion about all things. This is why we have a world of billions upon billions of people, all of whom seem to be at odds with one another, where people are not all on the same page. You see, if there were no misgivings, if there were no misunderstandings, then we would have billions of people in this world all pretty much on the same page, cooperating very nicely, etc. But that's not what we have. Rather, we have 7-8 billion people, all of whom have their misgivings about every single experience that they're having in their life. So, an individual who is fixed in the Supreme is an individual who is fully cleansed of such misgivings. So in other words, their illusion begins to dissipate. Their illusion about who they are, about everything around them, begins to dissipate. And how? Through complete knowledge. Through complete knowledge. Now, what exactly is meant by complete knowledge? See, what is said here is not just knowledge, not knowledge in and of itself. So in other words, not just picking up any book and, oh, now I have knowledge, so as a result, all of my misgivings will be gone, etc. It's not what's meant by this, but rather complete knowledge. By complete knowledge, what is meant is truly the highest of all knowledge, spiritual knowledge, that knowledge which is eternal. When we have this true knowledge, then all of our misgivings are gone. All of our illusion begins to dissipate. So, let's finish up this verse, and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. This is the prerequisite for being on the path of liberation, is that an individual must take refuge in the Supreme. They must be fixed in the Supreme. They must fully cleanse themselves. They must fully cleanse themselves of all misgivings, and they must do this through complete knowledge, i.e., true factual knowledge regarding the Supreme, regarding that which is eternal. Once an individual has done all this, then they can proceed straight to the path of liberation. So it's interesting. A person might very easily miss this very important point. Everything that was described here, this in and of itself is not merely the path to liberation, but rather this is what an individual must do to proceed to that path. So it's very interesting. In other words, of course, in today's day and age, when people tend to want everything very quickly, it's important to understand that before we can even begin to seriously think about spirituality, before we can begin to even practice spirituality, first we have to make ourselves worthy of that spirituality. So that's what Krishna is saying here in this verse. So with that, let's go on to the very next verse. And that last verse was chapter 5, verse 17. We're going to skip a few verses, and we're going to go to now still chapter 5, but now verse 24. And this verse proceeds in this way. One whose happiness is within, who is active within, who rejoices within, and is illumined within, is actually the perfect yogi. He is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme. What a beautiful verse. What a truly beautiful verse in so many ways that we'll explore now. First of all, of course, what is the theme of this verse? It is the within. The within, the within. You know, in a way, you could ask, what is one of the definitions, one of the prime definitions of a spiritual person, of a yogi, of an individual who wants to know truth? Well, they're the opposite of the typical person. And the typical person is the opposite of the within. The typical person lives in the without. They live in the exteriors. This is the average person, you know, again, if you are inside right now, which I assume you are, go outside, meet the typical person. And the vast, vast majority of people in the world, they live in accordance with their senses. What is outside of themselves? What's happening? Let me check my phone. Let me see what's on TV. Let me check the news. Let me take a walk, look all around me, etc. They live in an exterior realm. And what the yogi is the very opposite of this. They live in the within. They live in that realm primarily that is inside of them. Now, it's not that they don't live in the exterior world as well. Of course they do. And that's not the point. It's not that they reject the, as I always say, the material world. It's not that they reject the exterior. But their primary locus of being and activity is the interior. So most people, again, now looking at the common person, it's not only that they are concerned primarily with that which is around them, but they identify with it to the point where they forget about themselves entirely. The typical person is never centered in and of themselves. They're never centered in their Atman in any way whatsoever. The yogi, on the other hand, is. The yogi, on the other hand, understands what is the priority in awareness and cognizance. They have cognizant priority. In other words, they understand that the most important thing is indeed what is happening inside of them, and they live from the inside out. They live from that Atman to the exterior realm. So this is what the yogi is. So all this being said, this is what this verse is saying, that this is the nature of the yogi. So I will go through this clause by clause. One whose happiness is within. Again, right here, we see a difference. We see how, for most people, they're chasing their senses. Oh, they're going shopping. Oh, they're looking for a boyfriend, a girlfriend, etc., etc. They're running around on the outside looking for that happiness. For the yogi, on the other hand, that individual has happiness, but it is a happiness that is inside of them, that is within. And now, let's go on. Who is active within. Now, this is a very interesting one, and this is a clause I'm going to talk about for some time. The yogi is active within. Now, what is meant by this? The yogi, having a rich interior life, having a rich life of meditation, of sadhana, etc., is an individual for whom, when you look at the yogi, what will you see? Not always, but often what you'll see is this. You'll see the yogi sitting silently in meditation, unmoving, etc. Now, what is interesting is that while looking upon the yogi, the sadhu, the sage, etc., from the outside, this is what you will see. But is this all that is actually happening to the yogi? Is this what the yogi is experiencing? Absolutely not. On the interior, having a rich meditative life, there is a world of activity that is occurring, but it's occurring inside of them. So again, in this way also, the yogi is the very opposite of, the typical individual. You see the typical individual, and again, all their activities are outside, doing, looking, etc., following the senses. Whereas for the yogi, it is within, in their mind, in their heart, etc., in the realm of consciousness itself, that is where all the activities are occurring. So this is what this verse is saying, what this clause is saying, is that for the yogi, they are active as anyone else, but for them, primarily, it is within. Now, within only? Is it only within that they're active? No, that's the foundation. That's the start. But then, believe me, and you don't need to believe me, you just need to look at some truly wondrous yogis of the past. While they are very active within, deep in meditation, steeped in a rich world of blissful meditation within, when they finally open those eyes and they decide to do activity in the world, they can do activity like no one can do activity in this world. They do their activity perfectly. So let's go on to the next clause. Who rejoices within? Indeed, this is very, very important. Rejoices. What is meant by rejoice? You see, before we had the term happiness. That's a state of being, that the yogi is indeed happy. They're experiencing happiness. But rejoices is a different word. And what is meant by rejoices is that they are celebrating within. They are celebrating actively. And why is this the case? Well, it's because they are in ecstatic union with God. It's because they are experiencing devotion toward God. This being the case, they are jubilant. They are rejoicing inside of themselves. Again, even though the yogi may be seemingly sitting there, not doing anything, well, this is the case, that they are rejoicing within. And is illumined within. Indeed, the yogi does not need the light of the outside world. The yogi does not need the luster, the brilliance, the effulgence of the external world. On the contrary, being steeped in meditation, they have now discovered an illumination, a light that is there, that is both the light of their own consciousness as well as the light of God that is there within them. And indeed, they bathe themselves in such illumination while they are steeped in meditation. So the individual for whom everything that was just said describes that person, now we go on, is actually the perfect yogi. Actually the perfect yogi. So again, it is important to understand who is saying this. This is not someone's opinion. Indeed, all opinions fade into insignificance compared to this person who just made the statement. This is Krishna. This is Krishna, who is the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita. This is Krishna, who is the avatar of Sriman Narayana. This is God, in other words. This is God who is saying this. Such an individual is the definition of the perfect yogi. An individual who, again, is primarily living within to the without. So now, let's go on as Krishna in the next sentence describes even more what is the nature of this person, this perfected yogi. He is liberated in the Supreme. Here we have this liberation. He is liberated in the Supreme. What is meant by this? Again, not the 100 million different kinds of definitions of what it means to be liberated, not political liberation, this liberation, that liberation, etc., not petty liberations, but rather the very foundation of liberation itself. And what that liberation is surrender to God. When we surrender our existence to God, then we are truly liberated. So he is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme. So ultimately, this yogi who is following this path, indeed, ultimately attains the Supreme, attains God, will know that which is the absolute truth. Now let's go on to the last verse that we're going to look at today, and this is once again chapter 5, but now this is verse 25, and Krishna says, "One who is beyond duality and doubt, whose mind is engaged within, who is always busy working for the welfare of all sentient beings, and who is free from all sins, achieves liberation in the Supreme." So here's the path of liberation. That is what's being discussed here. So now let's look at this. One who is beyond duality. So indeed, of course, we know that in so many spiritual traditions, indeed, again, interestingly, dharmic, but even as far as the really good Western philosophers, there's the idea that indeed we are to transcend duality. We are to transcend our attachment to duality. So indeed, even the Stoic philosophers of ancient Greece, ancient Rome spoke about this, about how we are to transcend that which occurs to us in this world. Sometimes something good, sometimes something bad happens to us. Well, all these dualities will come and go of their own accord. But the yogi is an individual who has the ability to be calm and to be at peace and to be liberated within, despite all the external dualities that are constantly coming at him. So, one who is beyond duality and doubt. Doubt is a mind killer. It is a killer of the individual. It is a killer of the intellect. When an individual lives in doubt to the point where they doubt pretty much everything, they doubt their own existence, they doubt, they start doing this very childish, supposedly philosophical game, which there's nothing philosophical about it. Oh, how do I know that the chair actually is there? How do I know that it's actually daytime versus night, etc., etc.? When you begin to doubt everything, at that point, you have killed your own intellect. You have killed your own mind. And now you do not have the ability to grasp onto anything that is real, what to speak of the real. You can't even grab onto any individual instances of things that are real existence, what to speak of reality itself. So indeed, doubt in this sense, which is something which today is celebrated, unfortunately, in modernity. Everyone is taught to doubt everything except what the media tells them. People are told to doubt everything except for what their local politicians tell them. People are told to doubt, and you see where I'm going with this. Today, indeed, people are encouraged to doubt everything except for what the authorities tell you. Well, doubt itself is indeed something that we are meant to transcend. And indeed, we can only have ultimate peace within once we have transcended doubt. Now let's go on. Whose mind is engaged within. So again, we pretty much covered this, but an individual for whom their mind is not merely preoccupied with accumulating more data from the external world and filling up their mind with, again, everything coming into their senses and, as I was saying, what the media tells them, what their authorities tell them, what the politicians tell them, etc., etc. But rather, whose mind is engaged inwardly. What does this mean? That means that the yogi is meant to be a philosophical individual. They're meant to think deep thoughts, as the saying goes. They're meant to think about the meaning of life. They're meant to think about everything, and not in a sense of over-analysis, but in a sense of trying to truly understand deeply what is the nature of reality. But of course, also, their mind is engaged in that they are doing meditation, etc. Now let's go on. Now, this one is very important. This one is indeed crucial. Who is always busy working for the welfare of all sentient beings. How important is this? This is crucial. If it was not crucial, then Krishna would not have laid this out with such detail. Not just, who's a compassionate person? Not just, who likes other people and tries to do nice things once in a while. No. Krishna lays this out in a very detailed way. Let me read this again. Who is what? Always busy. So no, not an hour a week, which is good. Not 2 hours a week, which is a little better. But interestingly, Krishna makes this clear. Who is always busy? What does always mean? That means, at the very least, the bulk of their time. And if not in physical activity, then certainly in their mind. They are always busy working for, engaging in work for the welfare of all sentient beings. Now, first of all, this is Krishna who's speaking. This is not the Red Cross. This is not some charity. This is Krishna who is speaking. Krishna is attempting to help Arjuna to overcome his existential angst. He is attempting to help Arjuna to go from the deepest of depressions, which he was experiencing, to spiritual enlightenment. This being the case, when Krishna talks about the welfare of others, he's speaking primarily about spiritually. In other words, again, going to that foundation. Now, by welfare of others, does that mean that we should also feed the poor? Of course. We should also clothe those people who, again, are poor and they can't afford their own clothing? Sure, absolutely. We are meant to help people in every way. See, it's not one or the other. We're meant to help people in every way. However, we are also to understand that the foundation of helping others is always spiritual. Because whatever the peripheral problem seems to be, whatever that problem seems to be, ultimately, if you analyze it, it comes down to the spiritual. It comes down to, why is that individual suffering? They are suffering because they're in illusion. They are suffering because they have lied to themselves. They are suffering because they're seeking something infinitely greater than what they are presently experiencing. They're seeking knowledge of themselves. They're seeking knowledge of God, and they're seeking the peace that such knowledge gives to them. This is what an individual is ultimately seeking. This being the case, when Krishna speaks about the welfare of all, this is what he is saying to us today. And let me dwell on this for a moment, because I have to. It's this crucial, actually. What I do and what is done by all of our students in the International Sanatana Dharma Society is precisely what Krishna is saying here. We are engaged in attempting to help as many sincere people who are out there as possible to find this relief from their suffering, and to do so spiritually, to go again to the very root of their suffering. So let me just say this as an aside. Krishna is ordering us, Krishna is telling us that if we are yogis, then we are to have such tremendous compassion for the suffering people in this world that we are to do everything that we can to try to give them enlightenment, to try to give them dharma, to try to give them knowledge, to try to give them liberation, at the very least to show them the path to liberation. See, this is the thing. All you can do is show people the path. You can't force people along the path, and never would we, because that would defeat the entire purpose. But we are indeed to help those who are around us, who are presently in suffering. And let me make this very practical instead of just kind of in the air pseudo-philosophical theory. If you want to help people in this world, indeed all sentient beings who are suffering, who are seeking the opposite of suffering, who are seeking permanent and lasting joy and happiness, then the way that you do this is you must introduce Sanatana Dharma to them. You must introduce Dharma to them. You must introduce these teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, of the Srimad Bhagavatam, etc. The teachings that you find on this channel each and every week. You are to share this with every sentient being who you can, as long as they're open-minded, obviously. We believe in teaching, not preaching. We don't believe in bothering people. But whenever you, the individual who's watching right now, whenever you encounter anyone who you really know in your heart, this person can truly benefit tremendously by reading the Bhagavad Gita, by watching one of Acharyaji's videos, etc. Please do this. Please recommend to them. Please, as much as possible, give them Dharma in every and any way that you can. Because again, I'm going to read this one more time so we understand its importance. who is always busy working for the welfare of all sentient beings. However expansive a statement this is, not even all human beings, all sentient beings. Any being who is possessed of consciousness, which means any being who is alive, from the lowliest ant to the cow, to the dog, to the human, to the gods. Any being who is alive, we are to endeavor always to help them, to help them, to help them. So this is what I call upon all of you to do. Help them. It doesn't matter if you've been on this path for 10 years or if you've been on this path for a month. You can help anyone in some way. Not everyone needs to be a guru in order to help others. On the contrary, if that were the case, oh my Lord, I'd be 100,000 times more busy than I am now. No, indeed. In addition to what I do, I have hundreds and hundreds and thousands of students throughout the world. They do what they can also to help others who are suffering. And I would ask you to do the same. If this sounds like an enormous task that is almost scary, oh my Lord, where do I even start? You start by joining the International Sanatana Dharma Society and associating with our devotees. Indeed, if it hasn't been done already, hopefully someone has put the link to the Discord server up on, as soon as I said that, several of my disciples are immediately going for the laptop now to put it up there. People may not know, but when I give these live streams, we have people here in the temple as well. We had quite a few people here. Join our Discord server. Go there, associate with our more advanced students, our more advanced disciples. They will help you to use every tool that is available in order to help other people spiritually. You can volunteer for the ISDS. You can just on your own, again, it's this simple, just take the links to any and all of our videos of dharmacentral.com, of our books, and just spread them all over the internet. In that way, you will be giving millions of people the opportunity to learn. So with that, I see one of my students who is not even here has put it up. Very nice. Here we go. Join that Discord server, please, whenever you can. And again, not just in order to volunteer and to help the ISDS, to help others, but for your own sake as well. The association that you're going to find there is incomparable. People who have joined, they all say the same thing. They are amazed at how wonderful, how nice, how loving, how friendly all of our devotees are. So join the Discord server if you want to get more and more and more involved in restoring Dharma to this world. Now, all that is an aside. Now let's go back and finish this verse. And who is free from all sins. Indeed, this is one of the goals of the yogi, is to rid ourselves of anything negative that is there within us. And by sins, we're going to take this in the more expansive way. Certainly sins in the direct meaning of that term, the denotative meaning of that term. But more, what's also meant by free from sins is indeed anything that is negative, anything that is dark, anything that we know we do not want, that is there within our minds, any pollutants that are there within our minds, within our hearts. Well, an individual is to be free from these things. And you can be. You can be. You know, we have experience now in the International Sanatana Dharma Society that we have helped many hundreds and thousands of individuals to free themselves of anger, free themselves of resentment, free themselves from envy, jealousy, from depression, from enormous sadness. Indeed, I can't even tell you how many people we have helped to not commit suicide. They have been so depressed, and now they're the opposite. Now they're the opposite. So the yogi is to be free from all of these negative things. And when all these things are done, to look at the last clause, that individual achieves liberation in the Supreme. And again, that highest liberation, that true liberation, not in the petty materialistic sense, but a liberation such that wherever you find yourself, it can be in the best of situations, it can be in the worst of situations. One day you can find yourself in a palace, the next day in a prison. And wherever you find yourself, inwardly, you are at peace and you are rejoicing because you are communing with God at all times. That's liberation. It is within. So this is the path of liberation, and this is what I would ask of all of you, that you please seek, and not just seek. In fact, I'll be blunt. You don't need to seek anymore. You've just found it. It is here. It is in the teachings that you are finding on this channel. It is in what is the most dynamic spiritual movement currently upon the face of the earth, known as the International Sanatana Dharma Society. You have found it. Your seeking is over. Now you must practice. Now you must do. And this is my challenge to you. Please do. Please do meditation. Please be a yogi within this world. You can have your family, you can have your career, you can be in college, you can be in school, you can be doing whatever you're doing within this world. You don't have to renounce any of it, but also be a yogi. And with that, I thank you all very much for listening to my discourse. And we have a little bit more time, so if there are any questions, I would be very, very happy to answer any sincere questions about Sanatana Dharma that anyone has. So please feel free to ask your questions. Good. Here's a good question from Jason, and it is Namaste Acharya. Is there a mantra that we should recite on the head bead before chanting Om Namo Narayana? The answer is no. The head bead is actually not used for chanting. And for individuals who don't quite understand what Jason is referring to, just very quickly, let me show you, give you a visual of what he's referring to here. When initiated students do their mantra meditation, they use what is called japa mala. This is a very small one. The one that I use personally is very, very big. But these are beads that are used for doing mantra meditation. And this is what is called the head bead, is this top bead here, where you'll see that there's a little something that's attached to this, and it's a bead that's separate from the other beads. So he's asking, what mantra do you chant on that bead? The answer is you do not chant any mantra on that bead. That bead is not used for meditation. Rather, that is called the Vishnu bead. Sometimes it's called the Krishna bead, and it represents God. So the idea is that you're using the other beads and you're saying one mantra per bead, and you go around. And then once you've gone around, you do not jump over that head bead, because that would be considered disrespectful. That is the Vishnu bead. Instead, now you go the other way around, like this. And then again, you keep going back and forth like this, almost like a swing. But you never go over that head bead. You don't say a mantra on that head bead. Rather, that head bead is there to remind you of Vishnu, of Krishna, of God. So that's the idea of that. I hope that answers the question. Very good. Very good name. Truth 108 says, it is always a special time to be able to be a part of these wonderful live streams. It is a gift from God to be led here. Thank you so much for those wonderful words. I and we all truly appreciate it. And it's a wonderful time for me as well. This is Monday evenings when I do these live streams is something that's truly wonderful for me. I look forward to it. Very good. Good. All right, here's a question from Solace, from Nick. Thank you for this beautiful talk, Sri Acharya. My pleasure. After making an offering during puja, how do we know when it is appropriate to partake of it? I feel unsure if my offering has been accepted. Good. Let me answer this actually. First of all, as far as partaking, you can partake once you have offered. So in other words, first you offer something, then after that, it's fine to partake. So for example, I'll give you a very practical example. We offer incense in puja. And for those who don't know what puja means, that is basically ceremonial ritual offering where we have murtis, we have deities, and we offer things to these iconic images of God. Once something has been offered, then it is considered to be prasada. It's considered to be transformed into the grace of God, and it can then be enjoyed, not beforehand. So, for example, we offer incense. Well, when you light the incense, and I'm kind of an expert at this, I will light the incense, and as I'm even offering it, I try to either not smell it at all, or if there's no choice, I'm completely dispassionate. I try to not even be aware of the scent. Once I'm done offering the incense, and now I put the incense in an incense holder, now you can smell the incense because first it was enjoyed by God. And certainly the same with food. If you're going to offer food to God, you don't want to taste it first. First you offer it, and then you can taste the food. So this is true with everything that you offer. Now you ask something interesting here. You say you feel unsure when or if your offering has been accepted. Well, first of all, again, it's after you've offered it that it has been accepted, and now you can partake. But more, you ask really, how do you know if it has been accepted? And let me tell you the answer to this. If you are offering with full faith and devotion, God accepts it. That is the only important thing. If you offer with faith and devotion, it's not that, oh, God will say, well, nice try, but that incense not quite up to my standard. I prefer sandalwood and you did jasmine. I don't like jasmine. God doesn't do that. No, if you offer with faith and devotion, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, one who offers me a leaf, a little bit of water, etc., he will accept. So this is the case, that it is one's faith and one's devotion that are of importance. As long as you have that while offering sattvic items, then it is the case that God will accept. So I hope that answers the question for you, Nick. Jason, my pleasure in answering your question. Very good. Here's a good question from MZ. Namaste, Acharyaji. Please accept my humble obeisances. Would you please advise us on a scripture to learn about dharana practices? Thank you. Yes, if you look at Shandilya Upanishad, and if you look at the Yoga Yajnavalkya, that those two scriptures go more in depth than the typical yoga scriptures into what you're asking about. What is dharana? Dharana being concentration. They don't go into this in depth, but certainly more so than, let's say, something like the Yoga Sutras, which barely touches upon the topic just a little bit. So these are two scriptures certainly that I would recommend. There are also places within the Mahabharata as well. People don't know this, but there are certain sections of the Mahabharata that go very deeply into yoga specifically and yoga practice. When people think of the Mahabharata, they tend to think of, a notion of amazing stories. And then, of course, Bhagavad Gita is a part of the Mahabharata. But no, there are sections that go specifically into yoga and into dharana specifically. So I hope that's a good beginning for you. Very good. Here's another question from Truth 108. Namaste, Shri Acharyaji. Please accept my humble obeisances. Is it righteous to think of the Guru as father and attach to him in this way? Yes, that is perfectly fine, actually. Indeed, for many people, that's the case. The relationship that one disciple will have with the Guru versus another are not all cookie cutter relationships. They're not all exactly the same. Some people indeed will have more of a relationship with the Guru where they see the Guru as a father or a substitute father or something like that. For others, that's a little bit less the case. etc. But indeed, for many people, that is the case. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this. And indeed, this is kind of as a personal aside. It's sad to me, actually, but at the same time, it's good that it happens. So many people today, especially young people, today in the Kali Yuga, in the last several decades, are so lacking father figures to the point where it's very, very often the case that I'll have young men specifically by the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds who indeed will see me as a substitute father. And for me personally, on the one hand, it's kind of sad that that is the case, that they themselves didn't have fathers at all in their lives or didn't have very good fathers. It makes me very sad for them. But on the other hand, it humbles me and makes me know I'm in a very, very privileged role to be able to be seen in that way by my younger students especially. And it's a responsibility that I take very, very seriously. So indeed, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you ask about being attached to him, that is to the guru in this way. One should be attached to the guru. One should be attached to anything that is of the nature of the spiritual. One should be attached to God. One should be attached to truth. Indeed, this is why when we talk about not being attached to things, we need to be very careful. And very, very neophyte, very beginning sort of individuals on the spiritual path will not quite understand what is meant by detachment, and they'll also throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. And in their attempt to be quote unquote detached, they don't even want to be attached to that which is good. That's silly. That's infantile. That's a neophyte. That's someone who they're very new to the spiritual path. On the contrary, I can tell you this. I've been on the spiritual path for 49 years, and more seriously than you can conceive. And I have many attachments, but only to that which is real. I'm attached to God. I'm attached to truth. I'm attached to my gurus, plural, etc. To be attached to that which is real is a true attachment, and that is a good attachment. So yes, nothing wrong with such an attachment. Blue Suzaku asks a very important question here, very practical. Namaste Sri Acharyaji. When I do mantra meditation, many chaotic feelings and thoughts come up of their own accord. Will they naturally quiet down over time as I try to utter the mantra? The answer is absolutely yes. What you are describing is the experience of, let's just say 99.9% of meditators in the beginning. What you're explaining is what you're asking about is something that happens to all serious meditators. Is that in the very start? And the start, you see, when I say the very start, for a lot of people, when they hear me say the very start of one's meditation practice, maybe in their mind, they're thinking the first few weeks. I'm thinking the first few years. So in the very start of one's meditation practice, oh, your mind is going to rebel. You'll have interesting, strange feelings come to the surface, etc. This is a very natural thing. But if you continue with faith, this is why it is a practice. If you continue with faith and with patience, oh yes, that starts to go away. The chaos of the mind starts to become quieter and quieter. All those feelings that are stirred up, both good and bad, begin to become more stable, etc. And it comes to a point where you are at a place of complete peace. So please, 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 Blue Suzaku, and to anyone who's listening to me, never give up. Never give up your meditation practice or any important sadhana, because you will see an effect. You just have to be patient and continue. But yes, eventually it will happen. Very good. Here's a nice question from Rupesh, and it is Namaste Sri Acharyaji. Thank you for your wonderful satsang. My pleasure. Can you please tell us if there is a difference between prayer and mantra meditation? Thank you. Yes, there is an enormous difference between the two. Let me start in that order, actually, with prayer. With prayer, several things to say. First of all, your mind, your intellect, if you're saying the prayer out loud, even your mouth, are very active. So there's activity that's happening, but especially the inward activity is something that's very active. Your mind is going, you're thinking of words to say, etc. And more, you are propitiating the Supreme. In other words, you are addressing God and speaking to God using the logical format of language, etc., in such a way that you are either expressing your concerns to God, you're asking God for something, etc. So that's prayer. With meditation, on the other hand, meditation is the very opposite of everything I've just said about prayer. The mind is not active, the intellect is not active. With actual meditation, that is dhyana proper, the body is not active. Again, you're very, very still as you're doing your meditation. And more, you're not propitiating God. In other words, you're not asking God for anything. You're not communicating with God. You are communing with God. And you see the difference between those two. You're not communicating with God. You're not speaking to God. Rather, you're communing with God. You are experiencing God. So this too is one of the differences between prayer versus mantra meditation. With prayer, you're speaking, you're speaking, you're speaking. God is hearing. With meditation, it's the other way around. With meditation, you are quiet and you are absorbing God's presence. So that's the difference between prayer versus meditation. Very good. Vedic Heartland asks something nice here. Namaste, Sri Acharyaji. Thank you as always for breaking down these amazing verses. My pleasure. No questions today, but with Rama Navami coming up, I was really hoping you talk about Lord Rama once more. Oh, I will. I will. I have in the past, indeed. We have several videos, and by once more, this is probably what you're referring to. We have several videos in which I go very, very deeply and speak about the glories of Lord Rama, and certainly that will be the case again. So just stay tuned. Let's see. Yes, let me answer this quickly from Jason, and it is Namaste Acharyaji. Are there reliable translations of Ramanuja Acharya's commentaries? Let me tell you, as far as translations of his commentaries, all of the ones that I've encountered are quite good. In other words, I've not encountered a bad one. When it comes to translating Ramanuja versus the scriptures and what specific scripture you're talking about, the translations, the common translations of Ramanuja's Sri Bhashya, for example, his commentary on the Brahma Sutras, his Bhagavad Gita commentary, etc., the Vedanta Sara, so his commentary on the Upanishads, etc., etc. All of these are quite good. I have not thus far encountered a bad one, actually. So indeed, if you look at any of the more available translations of Ramanuja, you will probably be looking at a good translation. This is not always the case, on the other hand, when it comes to the scriptures. It's a case-by-case basis. Very good. This is the last question that I will answer. It is right to truth. Why don't you follow Advaita Vedanta? Because it is in every way a vastly inferior philosophical system to Vishishta Advaita. And why would I want to do that? That's simple. I can jump on the back of a donkey to get to my destination, or I can take a jet plane. I prefer the jet plane. Thank you. Very good. So with that, it is 8:01, and I thank you all very, very much for being here. And we are going to stop here for now. But please join us again next Monday as we have our next live stream. We do this every single Monday, almost without exception. You know, once in a while something happens, but we've been very, very good these days in getting together every single Monday. And let me just say a few things before I leave you. As always, if you have not subscribed to this channel, then please do so. As you've seen, there is no channel like this anywhere, not just on YouTube, but any venue, any platform. So please subscribe so you don't miss out on future future videos that are released here, live streams, etc. Also, do the notification bell as well, just to make sure that you're notified about new releases, etc. Please like this video when you can, and by doing so, you'll be helping the algorithms. Once the video is released, please feel free to comment as well, not just in the chat, but again, wait till the video is actually released as a video, and that being the case, please feel free to comment on the video. Please visit our website when you have a chance, and that is dharmacentral.com. You will find a treasure house of information there, including many of the books that we have available, a beautiful mantra meditation CD that's available. You will find ways in which you can donate to the International Sanatana Dharma Society, in which you can become a member, etc. And then last but not least, I'm going to say again, please join our Discord server if you are someone who, and again, I've said this before, I'll make this very blunt. Don't join if you want to debate with us, challenge us, if you have the notion in your mind you're going to teach us. No, work on your ego instead, go elsewhere. But if you're sincere, if you have humility, if you want to learn authentic Sanatana Dharma and the authentic Vedic path, as taught by myself, by the ISDS, as taught in the Vedic scriptures, and by all of the authentic Vedic Acharyas throughout time, please join our Discord server. And what you will find will be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of individuals who are there who will warmly embrace you and will help you in any and every way that they can. And with that, again, I thank you all for being here with me. Namaste. Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharmarashtra Jayate. Suryavansha Jayate. Victory to Sanatana Dharma. Victory to the Dharma nation. Victory to the solar dynasty. Evam bhavatu. May such victory be so. And so it shall be. With that, everyone, I thank you all for being here. And between now and the next time that we get together, I ask you all that in every way, you please take very good care of yourselves.